All your systems are looking good. Rolling around the corner. We'll see you on the other side. Over.
So recently, I was on a podcast with a bunch of moon hoaxers. It was on the podcast The Apollo Detectives, hosted on the channel Neil Peel, where they bring on guests and talk conspiracy theory. I was invited last month to join one of their podcasts and would be their first guest who believed that we actually landed on the moon. It was 1-on-7 and was civil and respectful most of the time. I want to publicly thank Neil and his partners for allowing me on the show, and I do hope I can come on again, but with some backup next time, as I was the only person and I'm not that good at thinking live. But I do think that I did a decent job, just not a great one while live. So what I want to do is take some of the things that I said during the live stream and expand upon them. By doing so, I will have a little bit of self-critique thrown in to show where I need to improve. Then I want to put a few points to rest by blowing them out of the water so hard that we will never hear an argument kin to it again. But first, I have one point that I want to address and will be today's subject in this 3-part series. It is Scott Henderson and his insistence that electric motors have oil. Towards the end of that 3-hour podcast, Scott Henderson, one of the guests, brought up this point right here.
Well, what you see here is oil leaking from down here. You can see it very, very wet down here. I have no idea why they cleaned off the stripe on this spot. It's perfectly clean. You can see everything sticking here, here, and here, and you can see it spraying up the inside.
Now, at first, I really couldn't tell what oil he was talking about. Nothing seemed to fit the description of what he said.
I still don't see where the oil is.
Sorry you can't see it.
And then finally, I got some help.
Is that the black material that seems to be spattered onto the hub?
Ah, that's it. You see, Scott believes that the lunar dust on the hub is actually oil.
You see the
Would
difference?
that not just be lunar dust?
But then how's it sticking?
Because the lunar dust is very sticky. I mean, how is it sticking to the astronaut? How is it sticking to literally everything else? Wasn't that one of the biggest problems they found?
But
So here I think I bring up a good point, but I say it in a very poor way. I describe the lunar dust as sticky, which is not the best way to describe it. I think if I were to use a single word to describe it, I would use the term grabby. The dust on the moon is a very fine powder that is sharp and abrasive. Because there is no wind or natural erosion on the lunar surface, the particles never round off and stay jagged and irregular. This makes lunar dust grab onto things with its tiny spurs and hooks. Add on top of that the great amount of static electricity. The surface of the moon is exposed directly to ultraviolet rays that give the dust particles a net positive charge. As NASA puts it, this made them cling onto things like packaging peanuts. All of this causes the lunar dust to get everywhere, and you would expect to find it on the wheel hubs. In fact, this was a big problem for the astronauts, lunar dust getting everywhere. So that answers the question of how is the dust sticking?
But you can see the difference in the wheel from the front to the back. This is oil leaking out of the rear axle.
So now Scott observes that the rear tires are dirtier than the front tires and assumes that the only way that this is possible is if oil is leaking out of the axle. This could be a fine assessment if it weren't for two things. One, where is the oil coming from, Scott? But we'll get to that later. And two, if you have never seen a car drive forward. You see, when a car drives forward, the drive wheels tend to throw things back. This is very evident when you have a 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive car drive on dirt. In this case, each wheel tosses dirt back. You would also expect the rear wheels to get dirtier than the front because those wheels are not just collecting dirt from their own spinning, but also from the front tires tossing it back at them. Then add the fact that the moon buggy had no body or flaps to stop the dirt, and that it had mesh tires that dust can get through, and you have the perfect recipe for the rear wheel hubs to be covered in moon dust. So again, Scott, this answers your question as to why the rear wheels is different than the front.
Patchy, isn't it?
It's
Lumped together.
right up there, right up the frame there.
So where's the oil coming from that's spraying out of the axle?
Right out of the center of the hub. You never driven a car before?
Yeah, axles are filled with grease, not with oil.
Right. Well, that's
I asked the question that the rest of my argument is based off of. Where is the oil coming from? Now, this is also where I really mess up in this argument for the first time. I had my mind on the electric motor and not on the combustion engine, which are two very different things. So when I'm thinking about this rover, my mind isn't thinking about diffs or rear axles or transmissions. It is thinking about an electric motor and the grease in the hub that allows it to spin easily. But the minds of my opponents are not thinking about electric motors, they are thinking about the combustion engine and their parts. So when Scott sees the black stuff in the hub, he instantly thinks differential oil or transmission oil, all without giving it a second thought. And this is where I found a large impasse, as I could not communicate this clearly to them, and it is my fault for not doing so. When you have people talking over you and interrupting you, someone who can easily be overstimulated and get lost for words, like myself, will find lots of trouble. I am not that good at thinking live. This is something that I am working on and will get better at in later streams and discussions. But as you see later, I give them too much rope and do not hold my point well enough.
If it was lunar dust, for instance, you would get it over the central hubcap bit in the middle, but it's actually coming out from under it. If you go back to that wheel again, Scott, like you say, yeah. See if you see where you got the little bolts around the central cap in the middle. There's nothing there at all.
What do you mean that there's no lunar dust on the cap in the middle? You see how it's dark gray, as in the same color as all the dust on the hub? Yeah, that's because there's lunar dust all over that cap. The cap was originally light gray or white, as demonstrated in these pictures of it being loaded onto the lunar lander. Yeah, that's all lunar dust on the cap.
It's not dry, it's gooey.
Yeah. It looks like wet mud.
And this is a very distinctive mark on it here.
Ah, the classic "it looks like, therefore it is," the conspiracy theorist's favorite argument. It looks like it's wet, therefore it is wet.
You know when I first found this? Okay, I sent this, I emailed this to a couple of mechanics and I said, how much? Like, what's the problem? How much? Okay, and it was between $250 and $400 to fix my vehicle. That's what they did. They didn't even recognize it as the Rover. They just thought it was a dune buggy.
That is not an argument, Scott. It's you tricking a mechanic into thinking that you are asking him about your buggy. This is you sending him a picture without context and him being a mechanic that's not crazy, assuming that you were being sincere. So he took a glance at his phone and gave you a figure off the top of his head without thinking much of it. In fact, I don't believe that you didn't poison the well in the text that you sent him, if this story is even true. But that doesn't matter, because this is not an argument. It's just, it looks like, therefore it is, again. Anyway, this is a good segue into something that I want to talk about. That is the topic of the arbitrary expectations that conspiracy theorists have and why they have them. You see this all the time when talking to a flat earther or anti-vaxxer or a moon hoaxer, where they have these crazy expectations about a topic, and when it's not met, then there's something wrong. An example of this within the moon hoaxers is when they say something like, "Why didn't we return to the moon? When I was a kid, I was told that we would vacation on the moon when we were older, but why hasn't that happened?" Returning to the moon and having vacations up there is an outrageous expectation to have, and it's not based on science, just on what they've seen and heard. Surface level stuff. We see this here with the moon buggy and Scott Henderson. For some reason, he expects the lunar rover to function in the same way as a normal car or buggy. I believe this is because he sees something with 4 wheels, a person on it, and is commonly called a buggy. So when he thinks of how it would operate, he's thinking about a common car, when he should be thinking about a rover. Because that's what the lunar rover is, a rover, not a car. When the engineers who worked on it started to design it, they started from the ground up. They were out to make a manned rover, not a car. So there is no reason to expect the two to operate in the same way, yet Scott still does. The rover doesn't have a steering wheel, nor a body, nor an engine. Instead, it has 4 motors, one for each wheel. In fact, if you had to compare it to any car, then a Tesla would be your best bet. But because Scott hears the term buggy, he expects it to operate like a buggy, without knowing that it's just called that for fun. It is not a buggy, Scott. It's a rover.
They thought it was an old Volkswagen.
Scott, where's the oil coming from if it's oil?
From the rear axle seal, right there. That is an axle seal, right there. You've never worked on a car, obviously.
Grease is in the axle. Axle grease.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Oil is in the
And
engine.
what's behind that?
Huh? So you're telling me that the oil came out of the transmission?
Not out of a transmission, no.
Can you please demonstrate to me where the oil's in the axle?
This one's on me. There is oil in the axle of a common car. It's in the differential, and it can come out of the differential through the axle and out the cab, and you would get oil on your hub, blah, 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 on a regular car. And as someone who's been around cars their entire life and worked on them, I should know better than this, but I guess in the heat of the moment, it slipped my mind and everything like that. This is on me. I completely forgot about the differential, and on a regular car, there is oil in the axle.
It's
as far
inside
as
the
I'm
casing
aware,
of the axle. Don't forget, on the other side of this is an electric motor. Okay?
Why
And
is there
it has
oil in the
gear, and it'll probably be using 90 weight motor gear oil in there. Not straight grease. Not bearing grease.
And this one's on you, Scott. Real quick, I want to hear you debunk yourself one more time.
Axle, don't forget, on the other side of this is an electric motor.
And what does that electric motor use?
Probably using 90 weight motor gear oil.
Of course, the electric motor on each wheel that doesn't contain a transmission nor any gears requires 90 weight gear oil? Scott, are you really saying this? Where would you put the oil? There's no gearbox, nor transmission, nor rear diff, nor engine. So, there is nowhere on the rover that you would put oil. So I ask you again, Scott, where did the oil come from?
Have you seen anything like this on a normal car? I mean, Scott, did you say you've seen this effect before on like a dune buggy? You mentioned your mechanic said it was a dune buggy.
Yeah.
Does that actually happen on a normal car, on an Earth
Oh,
car?
absolutely. Just drive a Dodge pickup truck, the rear axle seal's leaking and all leak. Like that's lubricated right through inside the casing, right through from the differential up to the outside. Then there's a seal, and then you have grease for your bearing seals. But when that breaks through, it just leaks out everywhere.
You're right. On a regular truck or car, you have a rear end that has a differential that has oil in it. But you only have a differential if you have a rear axle. And guess what the Lunar Rover did not have?
Same mission where the wheel is clean, as if some mechanic spotted that and said,
none of
"Cut,
them.
guys, we've got to
Dirty
cut
everywhere.
this. Let's get in here and let's clean this up before we carry on."
But the thing is, that's Apollo 17, and the same wheel is apparent in Apollo 16 and in Apollo 15 as well. That's the whole point. It's the same rover being used over and over again. And now I'm going to pull a file up. I'm going to pull a file
Just a
up.
sec, what did you say, Blue?
Back.
Is it possible that it's just because that the lunar
can't
dust
be
is
there.
very
One
sticky?
sec, Scott.
Is it possible that lunar dust is very sticky and that's just the lunar dirt on the hub?
But why
not
only that wheel then?
splash oil or whatever?
Why
on-
only that wheel?
Now watch some expert level goalpost maneuvering.
What? What do you mean
Why
why
only that
doesn't
wheel?
still have two?
But they're not the same. It's not anywhere near the
They're
same.
not the same. I drive my car through the dirt all the time, and it's not the same on the front or the back.
Scott changed it from that was the only wheel with anything on it to oh, the other wheels have things on it, but that's the one that's different. Yeah, good goalpost changing there, Scott.
Right.
Why?
But the other side on the back is
I can't
not,
see the other side on the
not
back.
like that.
I can't see the other side on the back.
Well, then you better take a look at the photographs and study
In
them.
the photograph, we can't see the other side.
Instead of telling me you can't see it, then take a look.
I can't.
I don't-
Because it doesn't. You can't see both
No,
sides
you
of the
need to
car at the
take
same
a
I don't
look.
think it's possible to resolve this actually because I mean we don't. I mean it's possible we can't actually feel the substance. It's just an image of some kind of substance. We can't actually feel
Yeah.
it. We can't actually see it. Well, we can see.
And that's basically where everyone else stepped in, and that was the end of that topic on the podcast. I think in this video I did a good job expanding my points that I made and demonstrating that it is more likely that the substance on the wheel hubs was actually lunar dust and not oil from the rover for two reasons. One, you would expect it to be lunar dust because lunar dust has all those little hooks and spurs and all the deal with the static electricity. It would stick to almost any surface. And point number two, there wasn't any oil on the lunar rover. Scott, you still have to answer that. Where did the oil come from? Well, that was a fun and long video to make. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want more Blue Earth Thing, hit me up on Instagram or on Twitter at Blue Earth Thing on both platforms. Please leave a comment, subscribe if you want, or just like the video. At the very least, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate every one of you. Thank you, and oh no. Oh no, 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 no. No, we've got to drag it out even longer. No! I'm Blue Earth Thing, or I'm not an expert. My background in this stuff is not anything spectacular. Where's the oil coming from? God, where's the oil coming from? Oil coming from? Clear, I'm not an expert.
You've never worked on a car, obviously.
Clear, I'm not an expert.
Really?
So this bit of absolute cringe was made by the channel that goes by the name Apollo Detectives, otherwise known as the Shill Stompers, who you might remember from a video that I made on them a couple of months ago. The man who runs the channel, who's supposedly named Bob Williams, is still a bit butthurt about me raking him over the coals in that video, and has been obsessed with me ever since. But making a very cringy fan video about me is not the way to go about it, Bob. And you know what the thing that offends me the most about this video? It's not the deceptive editing and manipulating of what I said. No, it's the fact that you can't even get my nickname right. It's Mad Dog Maddox, not Mad Maddox, Mad Dog Maddox. See, that's one of the benefits of being named after the best pitcher of all time. Nolan Ryan, Cy Young, they can all get wrecked. Greg Maddux for life, he's the GOAT.
Maddox with another nice play.
And with that, I think this video is finally over. I hope you guys enjoyed part one of this 3-part series. The next one will be an argument that you hear more often. If you would like, please leave a comment down below, or like the video, or if you really liked it, please subscribe to the channel. Each one helps a ton. But then again, thank you guys for just watching the video. Every view counts and is greatly appreciated. And with that, Blue Earth Thing out.